What if I told you that the secret to living past 100 years old was never hidden inside a laboratory, never locked behind the doors of a hospital, and never discovered by any scientist wearing a white coat and holding a clipboard? What if that secret was quietly living, breathing, and thriving inside a small island surrounded by the Pacific Ocean, carried in the hearts of ordinary people who woke up every morning not because an alarm forced them to, but because life itself was calling them forward? This is not a fairy tale. This is not a motivational speech designed to pump you up for 48 hours and then vanish into thin air. This is the story of Ikigai, a Japanese concept so ancient, so deeply woven into the fabric of human existence, that once you understand it, once you truly feel it in your bones, you will never look at your own life the same way again. So stay with me, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about happiness, purpose, health, and the art of living well. There is a village in Okinawa, Japan, where people forget to die. That sounds strange, does it not? But researchers who traveled there expecting to find some extraordinary medical miracle instead found something far more astonishing. They found fishermen in their 90s still casting nets into the sea before sunrise. They found women in their 80s tending gardens with the quiet energy of someone half their age. They found communities where laughter was medicine, where food was ceremony, and where every single morning held the weight and the warmth of meaning. These people were not taking pills to extend their lives. They were not following extreme fitness regimens. They were simply living with a reason, a deep, personal, unshakable reason to get out of bed every single day. And that reason had a name. That name was Ikigai. Iki, meaning life. Gai, meaning worth, value, or reason. Put them together and you get something that no translation can fully capture, but something that every human being on this planet has felt at some point, even if only for a fleeting moment. That electricity in your chest when you are doing exactly what you were made to do. That silence of the mind when the work in front of you feels not like labor, but like purpose. That strange, beautiful sense that you are exactly where you are supposed to be, doing exactly what you are supposed to do, for exactly the reason the universe intended. That is Ikigai. And the two men who brought this concept to the rest of the world, Francesc Miralles and Hector Garcia, did something remarkable. They did not just write a book about a philosophical idea. They traveled to Okinawa. They sat across from centenarians, people who had lived 100 years or more, and they listened. They asked questions. They paid attention. And what they brought back was not just a book. It was a map to a life worth living. But before we open that map, I need you to think about something. Think about the last time you woke up and genuinely could not wait to start your day. Not because something exciting was happening, not because a vacation was coming or a reward was waiting, but simply because you loved what you were going to do. Think about that feeling. Hold it for a moment. Now ask yourself honestly, when was the last time that happened? If you are struggling to remember, if you have to go back weeks or months or even years, then what I'm about to share with you is not just interesting information. It is a lifeline. Because here is the truth that the people of Okinawa understood in their bones long before the rest of the world caught up. A life without purpose is not just unfulfilling. It is physically dangerous. People who lose their sense of reason for being do not just become sad. They age faster. Their immune systems weaken. Their hearts, both the physical organ and the emotional core of who they are, begin to fail. And they die younger than those who have something, anything, to live for. This is not poetry. This is biology. This is research. This is the lived experience of thousands of people across centuries of human history. So let us go deeper. Let us travel not just to Okinawa, but across time and across the entire globe, because the truth of Ikigai does not belong to Japan alone. It belongs to every human being who has ever drawn breath and wondered why. Long before the word Ikigai ever existed, long before Japan had a name, there was a man in ancient Greece who embodied everything this concept stands for. His name was Archimedes. and the story that has survived thousands of years about him captures something essential about the human spirit. Legend says that when Archimedes discovered the principle of water displacement while sitting in a bathtub, he leapt from the water and ran through the streets of Syracuse shouting "Eureka," which means "I have found it." Now people have laughed at this story for centuries, but here's what most people miss about it. That moment of discovery, that electric rush of finding the answer to a problem that had consumed him completely, that was his Ikigai. That was the fire of purpose so intense, it made a grown man forget his clothes and run into the public square. That is not madness. That is meaning at its most raw and honest. Move forward 1,000 years and cross the world entirely to ancient Mali, where a man named Mansa Musa was building not just an empire but a civilization. People remember him for his legendary pilgrimage to Mecca in the 1400s, a journey so extravagant, with so much gold distributed along the way, that it reportedly caused inflation in Egypt for a decade afterward. But what history forgets to mention is that Mansa Musa did not pursue wealth for the sake of wealth. He pursued it because he believed his purpose was to elevate his people, to fund education, to build mosques and libraries and schools, to make his civilization a beacon of knowledge and culture. His Ikigai was not gold. His Ikigai was legacy. It was the enduring impact of a life poured entirely into something greater than himself. Now come back to the present. Come back to right now. Think about Elon Musk for a moment. Love him or question him, but look at what drives the man. He has said openly that he is not primarily motivated by money. He is motivated by the idea that humanity must become a multi-planetary species to survive. Whether you agree with that vision or not, what you cannot deny is that the intensity with which he pursues it, the sleepless nights, the failures he refuses to accept as final, the relentless forward motion, that is a man living his Ikigai. That is someone who has found a reason so large and so consuming that ordinary discomforts simply do not register. And this is the first great lesson hidden inside the philosophy of Ikigai. Purpose does not have to be small. Purpose does not have to be polite. Purpose does not have to look like anything anyone else has ever done. Purpose simply has to be real, and it has to be yours. But here is where the concept gets even more interesting, and where the book by Miralles and Garcia does something genuinely extraordinary. Because Ikigai is not just about finding a grand mission. It is not reserved for emperors and inventors and billionaires. It is woven into the smallest, most intimate moments of daily existence. And this is exactly what the elders of Okinawa taught these two authors when they sat down to listen. One of the oldest residents of the village of Ojimi, a community in northern Okinawa with one of the highest concentrations of centenarians on the planet, was asked a simple question. What is your reason for waking up every morning? The answer she gave was not about changing the world. It was not about leaving a legacy. She said she woke up every morning because she wanted to tend her garden, talk to her friends, and see what the sea looked like that day. That was it. That was her Ikigai, and she was 102 years old. Let that land for a moment. 102 years old, and her reason for living was a garden, a conversation, and the color of the ocean at sunrise. Not fame, not achievement, not the accumulation of anything at all. Just presence. Just the quiet, daily practice of being alive in a way that felt meaningful to her, and no one else had to understand it or validate it or agree with it. It simply had to be true. This is a radical idea in a world that constantly tells us our purpose must be visible, must be impressive, must be the kind of thing you can put on a resume or announce to a crowd. The wisdom of Okinawa, the wisdom that has been quietly keeping human beings alive and thriving for centuries, says something entirely different. It says your Ikigai does not have to impress anyone. It just has to be real enough to pull you out of bed in the morning. And now I want to take you into the heart of the concept itself, because Miralles and Garcia present Ikigai through a framework of 4 overlapping circles. 4 great questions that, when answered honestly, begin to reveal the shape of your purpose. I want to walk through each of these questions with you, not as a checklist, not as a self-help exercise, but as a genuine exploration. The kind that old philosophers used to call inquiry, the kind that changes you just by doing it. The first question is this: what do you love? This sounds simple. It sounds almost too simple to be useful. But hold on, because most people, when asked this question, immediately go to the things they have been told to love, the things that look good, the things that other people approve of. Very few people sit quietly and honestly and ask themselves what genuinely lights them up from the inside. What would they do if no one was watching, if no one was judging, if no reward or punishment was attached to the answer? Think about the story of Leonardo da Vinci. Here was a man who lived in 15th and 16th century Italy, during one of the most turbulent political and social periods Europe had ever seen. The world around him was in constant chaos. Wars were being fought, borders were shifting, power was changing hands with terrifying speed. And in the middle of all of this, Leonardo was filling notebooks with sketches of birds in flight, of water currents, of human anatomy, of impossible machines that would not be built for another 500 years. He was painting the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper. He was designing flying contraptions by candlelight. He was doing all of this not because anyone told him to, not because there was a market for flying machines in 1500, but because he could not help himself. Because his love for understanding the mechanics of the universe was so profound, so insatiable, that he simply had no choice. What do you love with that kind of intensity? What would you explore at midnight by candlelight if the world gave you permission? Because here is the secret. You do not need permission. You never did. The centenarians of Okinawa never asked anyone if it was acceptable to love their gardens or their fishing or their morning conversations. They just loved those things, openly, daily, without apology. Now some people hear this question and feel a sharp pang of grief because they realize they have been so busy doing what was expected of them that they have genuinely lost touch with what they love. They have been running so fast on the treadmill of obligation and productivity and social performance that the quiet voice inside them, the one that knows exactly what makes them come alive, has gone almost completely silent. If that is you, do not despair. That voice is not gone. It is just very, very quiet. And the way to hear it again is not complicated. It begins with stillness. It begins with exactly the kind of unhurried attention that the Okinawan elders have been practicing their entire lives. But we will come back to that. Because first we need to move to the second question. The second question is this: what are you good at? Now notice I did not ask what you are great at, or what you are the best at, or what awards you have won. I asked what you are good at, because the distinction matters enormously. Many people dismiss their genuine talents because they are not world-class at them. They can play the guitar, but they are not Jimi Hendrix, so they set it aside. They can cook extraordinary food, but they are not a Michelin-starred chef, so they call it a hobby and nothing more. They can write with genuine emotional depth, but they have not published a bestseller, so they do not count it. This is a tragedy, and the philosophy of Ikigai sees it as one. Because your Ikigai does not require you to be the greatest in the world at what you do. It requires you to be genuinely, authentically, consistently competent in a way that serves both yourself and others. That is enough. That has always been enough. Let me tell you about a man named Jiro Ono, who runs a sushi restaurant in Tokyo that has 3 Michelin stars and is considered by many to be the greatest sushi restaurant in the world. What makes Jiro remarkable is not just his technical skill, extraordinary as it is. What makes him remarkable is what he said in the documentary made about his life. He said that even after more than 70 years of making sushi, he still dreams about it at night. He still wakes up thinking about how he can improve. He still feels that he has not yet achieved perfection. He is in his 90s and he still goes to work every day. Not because he has to, not because he needs the money, but because making sushi is what he is good at, and being good at it, refining it, deepening it, giving it everything he has. That is his reason for living. What are you that good at? What is the thing that, when you do it, feels effortless in a way that it does not for most people? Not necessarily easy. Do not confuse effortless with easy. Effortless means it flows from you naturally. It means you do not have to fight yourself to do it. It means that even when it is hard, the difficulty feels appropriate, feels like the right kind of challenge, the kind that sharpens rather than drains. Think about the ancient warriors of Sparta who trained every single day of their lives from childhood through old age. Their physical skill in combat was not something they arrived at by accident or by talent alone. It was the result of thousands of hours of deliberate practice, of falling and getting back up, of pain and discipline and repetition. But it was also something they were genuinely built for, something that aligned with the deepest part of who they were. And that alignment between what they were built for and what they had trained to master, that was a form of Ikigai, even if they had no word for it. Now carry that idea with you as we move to the third circle. The third question is one that many people forget to ask, and forgetting it is one of the most common reasons people end up feeling that something essential is missing even from lives that look successful from the outside. The third question is this: what does the world need? This is where purpose transcends the personal. This is where your Ikigai stops being just about you and starts becoming a bridge between you and the rest of humanity. Because a life lived only in service of your own pleasure and your own excellence, no matter how deep that pleasure and excellence might be, will eventually feel hollow. Human beings are social creatures at the most fundamental biological level. We are wired for contribution. We are built to give. And when we are not giving, when we are not in some way serving something beyond ourselves, something in us withers. Consider the story of Mahatma Gandhi. Here was a man born into a middle-class family in colonial India, trained as a lawyer in London, who could have lived a comfortable and entirely unremarkable life managing cases and collecting fees. Instead, when he witnessed the systematic humiliation and oppression of his people under colonial rule, something inside him answered a call that was larger than his own comfort, larger than his own safety, larger in many ways than his own life. The world needed something, and he felt called to provide it. Not because he was perfect, not because he was without fear, but because the need was so clear and so urgent that ignoring it felt like a betrayal of his own soul. Now, I am not saying that everyone needs to lead a movement or change the course of history. The vast majority of meaningful contributions to the world happen quietly, invisibly, in ways that never make the news. A teacher in a village in rural Kenya who helps 30 children learn to read is meeting a need just as real as any political leader. A craftsman in a small town in Portugal who makes chairs so well that they last 3 generations is meeting a need. A father who shows up consistently, patiently, and lovingly for his children every single day is meeting one of the most profound needs that will ever exist. The question is not how large your contribution is. The question is whether you are genuinely meeting a real need in the world with what you have to offer. And this leads us to the fourth and perhaps most pragmatic question of all. The fourth question is, what can you be paid for? Now, some people recoil at this question. They feel that introducing money into a conversation about purpose somehow corrupts it, somehow makes it less pure. But the philosophy of Ikigai does not separate the practical from the spiritual. It understands that a life of purpose, to be sustainable, must be a life that can continue, and in the world as it is, continuation requires resources. Food, shelter, the tools of your craft, the time and freedom to pursue what matters to you. These things require an exchange of value, and money, at its most basic, is simply a way of measuring that exchange. The question is not whether you should be paid for your purpose. The question is whether you can find a way to provide so much value to the world through what you love and what you are good at that the world will gladly, willingly support you in doing it. Think about the great artisans of the Ottoman Empire, the carpet weavers of Persia, the calligraphers of the Islamic Golden Age. These were people who combined extraordinary technical skill with genuine love for their craft. They were serving a real need in their communities, the need for beauty, for art, for written records of knowledge and scripture. And they were supported by their societies to do this work, because their communities understood that the work was genuinely valuable. Their Ikigai was not separate from their livelihood. It was their livelihood. And when all four of these circles, what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for, begin to overlap, when you find the center where all four questions point to the same answer, that center is your Ikigai. But here is something the book makes absolutely clear that I want you to hear. Finding your Ikigai is not a single dramatic revelation. It is not a moment where the clouds part and a beam of light descends and a voice from the universe announces your destiny. For most people, most of the time, discovering your Ikigai is a slow, gradual process of paying attention, of trying things, of following small sparks of interest wherever they lead, of listening to the quiet signals your own body and mind send you when you are doing something that matters. The centenarians of Okinawa did not find their Ikigai in a single moment of enlightenment. They found it through a lifetime of showing up, of paying attention, of choosing, day after day, to orient their lives around what felt real and meaningful to them. It was not dramatic. It was not even always conscious. It was simply the accumulated result of thousands of small choices made in alignment with who they truly were. Now I want to take you somewhere else entirely, because Miralles and Garcia, in their exploration of Ikigai, dive deep into a concept that is essential to understanding how purpose translates into daily experience. That concept is called flow, and it was named and studied by one of the most important psychologists of the 20th century, a man with a name that very few people can spell on the first try, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Say that 3 times fast. Go ahead, I will wait. Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying the states in which human beings are at their happiest and most productive. He interviewed artists and athletes, chess masters and surgeons, rock climbers and composers. And what he discovered across all of these wildly different fields and contexts was something fascinating. The moments when people reported feeling most alive, most focused, most genuinely fulfilled were not the moments of leisure or relaxation. They were not the moments of vacation or reward. They were the moments when they were so completely absorbed in a challenging and meaningful activity that time seemed to dissolve. When they forgot to be hungry, forgot to check their phones, forgot to worry about anything outside the walls of what they were doing. He called this state flow. And the people of Okinawa, without any knowledge of Western psychology, had been living in it for centuries. Think about what flow feels like. Think about a time when you were working on something and you looked up and realized that 3 hours had passed, but it felt like 20 minutes. Think about a time when you were so absorbed in a conversation or a project or a physical activity that the rest of the world simply ceased to exist for a while. That was flow. That was your nervous system operating at its highest possible frequency. That was your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Not scrolling, not multitasking, not managing notifications, but engaging completely and powerfully with a single meaningful challenge. And here is what makes this so important to the philosophy of Ikigai. Flow is not something you chase. Flow is something you invite by organizing your life around activities that are challenging enough to require your full attention, but not so overwhelming that they produce paralysis. Flow lives in the sweet spot between boredom and anxiety. It is what happens when your skills and the difficulty of your challenge are perfectly matched. The master swordsmen of feudal Japan understood this intuitively. The great samurai, men like Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote one of the most enduring books on strategy and philosophy ever produced, did not train to fight. They trained to be so completely absorbed in the act of training that the fighting, when it came, was simply an extension of a state they had already learned to inhabit fully. Musashi himself did not just practice swordsmanship. He painted, he sculpted, he meditated. He understood that the capacity for flow was not specific to any single activity. It was a quality of attention that, once cultivated, could be brought to anything. In the modern world, think about the experience of a professional programmer who is deep in a complex problem and reaches that state where the code begins to flow from their fingertips as though they are not writing it but receiving it. Or think about a jazz musician in the middle of an improvisation, where every note seems to arrive from somewhere beyond conscious thought. Or think about a surgeon in the middle of a delicate procedure who does not experience the hours as hours at all, but as a single continuous moment of absolute presence. These are all expressions of flow. These are all glimpses of what Ikigai looks like when it is working at full power. And what Csikszentmihalyi found, and what the book on Ikigai confirms, is that people who regularly experience flow do not just live better. They live longer. They are healthier. They are more resilient. They recover faster from setbacks and illness. They report significantly higher levels of satisfaction with their lives. Not because their lives are free from difficulty, but because they have found a way to engage with the difficulty of life in a way that feels purposeful rather than punishing. But now I need to take you somewhere even more ancient, because the roots of what we are talking about go far deeper than modern psychology. They go all the way back to the earliest human civilizations, and they show us that the search for a meaningful life is not the modern problem invented by people with too much time on their hands. It is the oldest problem in the history of conscious beings. In ancient Egypt, nearly 5,000 years ago, there was a concept called Ma'at, which represented truth, justice, harmony, and balance. The Egyptians believed that a good life, a life that the gods would honor and that would survive judgment in the afterlife, was a life lived in alignment with Ma'at, not a life of pleasure alone, not a life of power alone, a life of balance, a life in which you contributed to the order and harmony of your community, in which you treated others justly, in which you played your role in the great tapestry of existence with care and integrity. Does that sound familiar? Does that remind you of anything? Because what the ancient Egyptians were describing, thousands of years before the word Ikigai existed, was the same essential truth: that a life of meaning is a life in balance, a life that serves both the individual and the community, a life that is oriented toward something beyond the accumulation of personal comfort. And this was not unique to Egypt. Cross the ancient world and you find the same idea emerging independently in culture after culture, as if the truth of it was so obvious, so fundamental to the human experience, that every civilization that ever tried to figure out how to live well arrived at it eventually. In ancient China, Confucius taught that a person's highest purpose was to cultivate their own virtue and then use that virtue in service of their family, their community, and their society. The order mattered. You cannot give what you do not have. You cannot serve from emptiness. You must first cultivate something genuine within yourself and then offer it outward. This is exactly the logic of the Ikigai framework. In ancient India, the Bhagavad Gita, a text that has shaped the lives of hundreds of millions of people across thousands of years, taught a concept called dharma, which is sometimes translated as duty, but which more accurately means something like your sacred role in the universe, the specific, irreplaceable contribution that only you can make. Lord Krishna tells the warrior Arjuna that it is better to fulfill your own dharma imperfectly than to fulfill someone else's dharma perfectly. In other words, living someone else's version of a meaningful life, no matter how impressively you do it, is not the same as living your own. Your dharma, your ikigai, is specific to you, and it cannot be borrowed or inherited or copied. Now let us come forward in time again, because the modern world has created its own unique obstacles to finding and living your ikigai, obstacles that the elders of Okinawa did not have to face in quite the same way, and that deserves serious attention. The first and perhaps most devastating of these modern obstacles is what psychologists call the paradox of choice. In previous centuries, in most of human history, the range of possible lives available to any given person was relatively narrow. Your community, your birth, your gender, your geography, all of these factors constrain the options available to you in ways that were often unjust, but that had an unexpected side effect. They made the question of purpose somewhat easier to answer, simply because there were fewer answers to choose from. Today, in a globally connected world with infinite information at your fingertips and theoretically unlimited options available, the question of what to do with your life has become not easier but harder. The sheer volume of possibilities is paralyzing. You can see, with immediate and constant clarity, every possible path not taken, every alternative life being lived by someone else, every achievement you have not yet achieved. And this constant comparison, this relentless exposure to what you are not doing, can make it nearly impossible to commit fully to what you are doing. The philosopher Barry Schwartz wrote about this extensively in a book called The Paradox of Choice, and what he found was that people with fewer options often report higher levels of satisfaction with their choices than people with unlimited options. Because when you have chosen from 1,000 possibilities, a small part of your mind is always wondering about the 999 you did not choose. But when you have chosen from 10, you commit more fully to the one you picked. The centenarians of Okinawa, in a very real sense, benefited from this. Their lives were not cluttered with infinite choices. They knew what their community needed. They knew what they were good at. They had grown up in a tradition that valued specific crafts, specific roles, specific relationships. And within that framework, they found their Ikigai and committed to it without the constant noise of distraction pulling them in a dozen different directions. For those of us living in the modern world, the lesson is not that we should artificially limit our options. The lesson is that we must cultivate the discipline of commitment. That at some point, the exploration must give way to the choosing. That having found something that resonates across all four circles of the Ikigai framework, we must choose it fully, live it fully, and stop reserving part of our energy for all the other lives we could theoretically be living. And this connects directly to one of the most powerful sections of the Miralles and Garcia book, which deals with the anti-aging wisdom embedded in the Okinawan way of life. Because it turns out that the physical health of these extraordinary centenarians is not separate from their sense of purpose. It is directly, causally connected to it. Science has been catching up to what these communities have known instinctively for generations. Research published in some of the most prestigious medical journals in the world has now shown conclusively that people with a strong sense of purpose in life live longer, have lower rates of heart disease, experience significantly reduced rates of Alzheimer's disease and dementia, have stronger immune systems, recover more quickly from surgery and illness, and are dramatically less likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. The connection between purpose and physical health is not metaphorical. It is not inspirational rhetoric. It is measurable, reproducible, and profound. One study followed thousands of middle-aged adults over multiple years and found that those who scored highest on measures of purpose and meaning were significantly less likely to die during the study period than those who scored lowest, regardless of their starting health status. Let me say that again because it deserves to be said clearly. People with a strong sense of purpose were less likely to die, not because they were healthier to begin with, but because purpose itself appears to be a protective factor against the biological processes of aging and disease. And the mechanism behind this is beginning to be understood. When you live with purpose, your body produces different levels of stress hormones. Your cortisol regulation improves. Your inflammatory responses are more balanced. Your autonomic nervous system, the system that regulates your fight or flight response, operates more efficiently. You sleep better. You eat more mindfully. You are more likely to maintain social connections, which are themselves among the most powerful protective factors against illness and early death. In short, finding and living your Ikigai is not just good for your soul. It is quite literally good for your biology. Now let us go back to Okinawa, because the physical environment and the social structures of that island contain secrets that go even deeper than philosophy. And Miralles and Garcia unpack these secrets with a level of detail and care that is genuinely illuminating. One of the most striking things about the blue zones, a term coined by the researcher Dan Buettner to describe the 5 regions of the world where people live measurably longer than anywhere else, is that Okinawa tops the list. And the lifestyle patterns of Okinawan centenarians share certain features that appear again and again, features that align perfectly with the philosophy of Ikigai. The first of these is a concept called Hara Hachi Bu, which is an old Confucian teaching that the Okinawans have embedded into their daily eating practice. Hara Hachi Bu means stop eating when you are 80% full, not when you are stuffed, not when the plate is empty, not when everyone else at the table is done, but when you are 80% full. This sounds simple. It is not. In a world of supersized portions, all-you-can-eat buffets, and the deep psychological conditioning that equates full plates with love, abundance, and success, choosing to stop before you feel completely satisfied is an act of genuine discipline. But the science behind it is remarkable. Restricting caloric intake without causing malnutrition has been shown in study after study, across multiple species and multiple research settings, to extend lifespan significantly. The biological mechanisms involve reduced oxidative stress, improved insulin sensitivity, and enhanced cellular repair processes. And the Okinawans have been practicing this intuitively, guided by an ancient teaching rather than a modern nutrition manual, for generations. What does this have to do with Ikigai? Everything. Because the Hara Hachi Bu principle is not just about food. It is about a broader philosophy of not taking more than you need, of living lightly, of creating space rather than constantly filling it. A person who has found their Ikigai does not need to consume constantly to fill a void, because the void is already filled by purpose. Overconsumption of food, of entertainment, of information, of stimulation is often a symptom of purpose hunger, of a life that is not organized around anything real enough to provide genuine nourishment. The second lifestyle pattern is the Okinawan diet itself, and it is worth spending some time here because it is both ancient and remarkably supported by modern nutritional science. The traditional Okinawan diet is built around vegetables, particularly dark leafy greens and root vegetables like sweet potato, which is perhaps the single most important food in the traditional Okinawan pantry. Sweet potato, particularly the purple variety, is extraordinarily rich in antioxidants, fiber, and a range of vitamins and minerals that support cardiovascular health and cognitive function. The Okinawans have eaten it as a staple food for centuries, not because they studied its nutritional profile, but because it grew abundantly in their soil and nourished them visibly and consistently. Beyond sweet potato, the traditional diet includes significant amounts of tofu, seaweed, miso, fish, and green tea, with very small amounts of meat and almost no processed food. It is low in calories and high in nutrients. It is varied and colorful. It is eaten slowly, in good company, with attention and appreciation rather than guilt or distraction. There is a Japanese concept called shoku iku, which means food education, and it encompasses not just what you eat, but how you relate to food. The idea that eating is not just a biological necessity, but a practice that can be performed with care, with intention, with gratitude, and with social connection. The Okinawans, without calling it anything, have been practicing shoku-iku for as long as anyone can remember. Compare this to the modern eating patterns that have spread across much of the developed world. Eating alone in front of screens, eating quickly between obligations, eating food that has been so processed and engineered that it no longer resembles anything that ever grew in the ground or swam in the sea. And then look at the corresponding rates of chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular illness, and cognitive decline. The contrast is not subtle, it is staggering. But again, the deeper connection to Ikigai is this. The way the Okinawans eat is not separate from the way they live. It reflects the same values: simplicity, presence, community, gratitude, connection to the natural world. These are not food values. They are life values. And they show up in every aspect of Okinawan daily existence, from the way they eat, to the way they work, to the way they age. Now let me take you to a concept that the book explores with particular depth and that I believe is one of the most practically powerful ideas it contains. That concept is the Okinawan moai. In Okinawa, particularly among the older generations, there is a social tradition called the moai. A moai is a group of lifelong friends who form a close social circle and commit to each other for life. These groups often form in childhood or young adulthood, and they persist for decades, sometimes for an entire lifetime. Members of a moai meet regularly, support each other emotionally and financially through difficult times, celebrate together during good times, and create a web of belonging and accountability that sustains each individual through the inevitable challenges of a long life. Now think about this for a moment. Because what the moai does is essentially provide a community within a community. In a world where the bonds of extended family have weakened and the concept of lifelong neighborhood has largely dissolved, the moai is an intentionally created, deliberately maintained structure of human connection. And the research on social connection and longevity is as clear and consistent as any finding in the entire field of medicine. The Harvard Study of Adult Development, which is the longest-running study of adult life in the history of science, followed a group of men from youth into old age over more than 80 years and reached a conclusion that its directors describe as the clearest finding of the entire study. The people who stayed happiest and healthiest throughout their lives were not the people who achieved the most, or earned the most, or gained the most recognition. They were the people who had the warmest, most connected relationships. Not the most relationships, not the most impressive relationships, the warmest and most connected. Full stop. The quality of your relationships is more predictive of your long-term health and happiness than your cholesterol level, your income, your professional achievement, or your genetic makeup. This is not a small finding. This is perhaps the most important finding in the history of the study of human well-being. And the Okinawans, without any psychology degree, without any longitudinal study, have been living this truth for generations through the institution of the moai. Think about what this means for your own life. Think about the relationships you have invested in most deeply, and whether that investment has been proportional to how much you value them. Think about the friends you have let drift because life got busy, because distance made things complicated, because the easy, frictionless connection of social media gave you the illusion of relationship without the substance. The moai is a reminder that genuine human connection requires deliberate effort. It requires showing up. It requires being present, not just physically, but emotionally. It requires the kind of sustained, consistent investment of time and care that the modern world conspires against at every turn. And this is where the philosophy of Ikigai intersects with the practical wisdom of community in a way that is both ancient and urgently relevant. Because your Ikigai does not exist in isolation. It exists in relationship. The person you are at your best, the work you do when you are most alive, the version of yourself that is most fully expressed, does not emerge in solitude. It emerges in the presence of people who know you, who see you, who challenge you, and who celebrate your particular way of being in the world. Let me give you an example from the other side of the planet. In ancient West Africa, there was a philosophical concept called Ubuntu, which is often translated as I am because we are. This is not just a poetic sentiment. It is a deep understanding of the interdependent nature of human existence. The idea that your individuality, your personhood, your very ability to have a self-worth expressing is not something you create alone in isolation. It is something that emerges from and is sustained by your relationships and your community. Ubuntu and Ikigai, separated by the entire width of the globe and thousands of years of history, are pointing at the same truth from different directions. Your purpose is not separate from your people. Your reason for being is not a private transaction between you and the universe. It is a conversation, ongoing, evolving, conducted in relationship with the world around you. Now I want to talk about something that might surprise you in the context of this conversation. I want to talk about stress, Because the popular understanding of stress and health gets something fundamentally wrong, and the philosophy of Ikigai can help correct it. Most people have been taught to think of stress as universally harmful, as something to be minimized and avoided as aggressively as possible. The wellness industry has built an enormous empire on the promise of a stress-free life. And yet, the centenarians of Okinawa and the other blue zones were not stress-free. They did not live lives of perfect ease and leisure. They worked. They faced difficulty. They experienced loss. They dealt with the physical challenges of aging and the emotional challenges of watching people they loved die before them. Their lives were not without hardship. What set them apart was not the absence of stress, but the relationship they had with stress. And this distinction is enormous. Research by the psychologist Kelly McGonigal has shown convincingly that stress itself is not as harmful to health as the belief that stress is harmful to health. In a striking study using data from tens of thousands of people, she found that people who experienced high levels of stress and believed that stress was harmful to them had a dramatically elevated risk of death compared to the population average. But people who experienced equally high levels of stress and did not believe that stress was harmful showed no elevated risk at all. Their stress, measurably similar in intensity to the other group, was simply not killing them because they were not treating it as a threat. The Okinawan elders, with their sense of Ikigai firmly in place, experienced stress not as a threat to their existence, but as the natural texture of a life being fully lived. The fisherman who wakes before dawn to go out in a boat in uncertain conditions does not experience that difficulty as something to be escaped. It is part of the work, and the work is part of his Ikigai, and his Ikigai gives the difficulty its meaning. He is not being worn down by the effort. He is being built up by it. This is a profound reframe, and it connects to a concept from ancient Stoic philosophy that has remarkable relevance here. The Stoics, philosophers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, who flourished in ancient Rome and Greece roughly 2,000 years ago, had a principle called amor fati, which means love of fate. It is the practice of not merely accepting the difficulties of life, but actively embracing them, finding in them the raw material of growth, of character, of wisdom. Marcus Aurelius, who was simultaneously the most powerful man in the known world and a committed Stoic philosopher, wrote in his private journal that the impediment to action advances action, and that what stands in the way becomes the way. What stands in the way becomes the way. Let that resonate for a moment, because it is one of the most useful ideas a human being can carry. The person who has found their Ikigai does not experience obstacles as evidence that they are on the wrong path. They experience obstacles as evidence that they are on a path that matters, because only paths that matter have real obstacles. The things that do not matter, the lives that are lived on autopilot in comfortable avoidance of anything difficult, those lives do not have real obstacles. They have only the slow, quiet erosion of unused potential. Now, I want to spend some time on a section of the Miralles and Garcia book that deals directly with the wisdom of the masters. Those extraordinary individuals who have devoted themselves so completely to a single craft that their lives become a kind of living philosophy. Because there are lessons here that go far beyond any specific craft or discipline. Lessons that apply to every human being trying to figure out how to be more fully alive. Japan has a concept called shokunin, which is often translated as craftsman or artisan, but which carries a much deeper meaning. A shokunin is not just someone who makes things with skill. A shokunin is someone whose work has become inseparable from their identity, from their sense of purpose, from their understanding of what it means to live correctly. The shokunin does not clock in and clock out. The shokunin does not think about their work as a means to an end. For the shokunin, the work itself is the point. Jiro Ono, whom I mentioned earlier, is perhaps the most famous living example of the shokunin spirit. But you can find the same quality in potters in the mountains of South Korea, in carpet weavers in the high valleys of Iran, in blacksmiths in the forges of rural Sweden, in winemakers on the slopes of Burgundy who have been tending the same vines for 3 and 4 generations. In each of these cases, you find a human being who has understood at the deepest possible level that the quality of attention you bring to your work is the quality of attention you bring to your life. And this connects to a specific philosophical tradition in Japan called wabi-sabi, which is the aesthetic and philosophical appreciation of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. Wabi-sabi says that the crack in the bowl does not diminish the bowl. It makes the bowl more beautiful, more honest, more human. The weathered surface of the old wooden table tells the story of a life being lived. The faded color of the old silk kimono carries within it the memory of every moment it has existed. This is a radically different relationship with imperfection than the one most people in the modern world have been taught to maintain. We have been conditioned to see imperfection as failure, as something to be corrected and concealed and overcome as quickly as possible. But wabi-sabi says that imperfection is not the opposite of beauty. Imperfection is the condition of beauty. It is what makes beautiful things real rather than artificial. And this connects to Ikigai in a way that is deeply liberating. Because one of the things that prevents most people from committing to their purpose is the fear that they are not yet good enough, that they are not yet ready, that there are still too many imperfections in what they do or who they are to justify fully showing up. Wabi-sabi dismantles this fear by reminding you that the imperfection is not a problem to be solved. It is part of the story. It is part of what makes you, your particular version of your craft, your specific way of serving the world, something that only you can offer. No one else has your exact combination of experiences and abilities and scars and passions and failures and triumphs. No one else has your specific history and your specific perspective and your specific way of seeing. Your imperfections are not obstacles to your Ikigai. They are part of what makes your Ikigai yours. Let me take you now to a story from ancient China that illuminates this perfectly. There was a legendary calligrapher in the Tang dynasty whose name was Wang Xiji, and his calligraphy was so revered that it was said the emperor himself wept when he saw it. But what made Wang Xiji extraordinary was not that his brushstrokes were perfect. It was that they were alive. They carried within them the particular quality of his attention at the moment they were made. Each character he painted was unique, unrepeatable, a single moment of consciousness expressed in ink on paper. It could not be copied. Not because the technical movements could not be replicated, but because the consciousness behind them could not be replicated. His Ikigai made his work unduplicatable. And this is the deepest truth about purpose that the book leads you toward. When you have found your Ikigai, when you are living in alignment with your deepest capacities and your genuine values and the real needs of the world around you, what you produce is not just good, it is irreplaceable, because it is the expression of a specific, unique human consciousness engaged at its highest possible level with a specific, real, meaningful challenge. No algorithm can produce that. No automation can replicate it. No artificial intelligence, however sophisticated, can do what a human being fully alive in their purpose can do. Because what a human being fully alive in their purpose produces is not just output, it is meaning. And meaning is not an optimization problem. It is a human one. Now, let us talk about something that the book addresses directly and that I think deserves far more attention than it typically gets in conversations about purpose and meaning. Let us talk about the terror of beginning. Because one of the great ironies of the Ikigai journey is that many people who have genuinely identified what lights them up, who have had moments of clarity about what they love and what they are good at and what the world needs from them, are still not doing it. They are still sitting on the bank of the river rather than getting in. And the reason, almost always, comes down to some version of fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of beginning badly, fear of what it will mean about them if they try and it does not work out. Fear of the gap between what they can imagine and what they can currently produce. Fear, fear, fear in 100 different shapes and sizes, all serving the same fundamental function, which is to keep them safely in a smaller version of their lives. The ancient Japanese concept of Kaizen, which means continuous improvement through small, incremental steps, is one of the most powerful antidotes to this fear that has ever been articulated. Kaizen says that you do not have to arrive at mastery before you begin. You do not have to be ready before you start. You simply have to begin and then improve, one small step at a time, so consistently and so patiently that the cumulative effect of all those small improvements eventually produces something extraordinary. The carpenter does not pick up a hammer for the first time and build a cathedral. He builds a birdhouse, and then a slightly better birdhouse, and then a table, and then a chair, and then a room. And if he keeps going, if he never stops adding his daily increment of skill and knowledge and attention, eventually he builds something that takes people's breath away. Not because he arrived at it in a single leap, but because he never stopped taking the next small step. This principle was not invented in Japan. It has been understood by every master of every craft in every civilization that has ever existed. The ancient Greek sculptor Phidias, who oversaw the construction of the Parthenon and sculpted the statue of Zeus at Olympia, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, did not begin his career creating wonders. He began, like every sculptor before and since, by learning to feel the difference between a bad cut and a good one. By developing, through thousands of repetitions, the sensitivity to know when the stone was telling him something and when he was ignoring it. Michelangelo, that other titan of sculptural genius, is famously reported to have said that the sculpture is already in the stone, and the artist simply removes everything that is not the sculpture. Whether he said it exactly that way or not, the idea is profound and directly relevant to Ikigai. Your purpose, your Ikigai, is already inside you. The work is not to create it from nothing. The work is to remove everything that is covering it, everything that is not it, through the patient, consistent practice of paying attention to what lights you up and continuing to move toward it, one small step at a time. Kaizen applied to the Ikigai journey looks like this. You do not start by quitting your job and committing everything to your purpose. You start by giving your purpose 20 minutes every morning before anyone else in the world wakes up. You start by reading one book every month in the direction you want to grow. You start by having one conversation every week with someone who is doing what you want to do and asking them how. You start small. You start now. And you trust that if you never stop starting, you will eventually arrive somewhere remarkable. Let me tell you about a man named Colonel Harlan Sanders, who spent most of his life trying things that did not work. He was a farmhand, an army private, a locomotive fireman, a railroad worker, a failed insurance salesman, a failed lawyer, and a gas station operator before he eventually started cooking chicken in the back of his service station in Corbin, Kentucky. He was 65 years old when his restaurant was shut down by the construction of a new highway that bypassed his location. He received a government check for $105, the amount of his first Social Security payment, and decided to travel the country trying to sell his chicken recipe to restaurant owners. He was rejected 1,009 times. 1,009 times. He drove around in a car that he slept in, wearing his white suit because he believed it was important to look like the person he intended to become. And he kept going. He kept starting over. He found his purpose not in a flash of inspiration in his youth, but through decades of trial and error and failure and persistence, and the gradual clarification of what he was genuinely good at and what the world needed that he could provide. And at the age of 65, through nothing but Kaizen and the refusal to stop, he built one of the most recognizable food brands on the planet. Now, I tell you this story not to romanticize relentless persistence for its own sake. Persistence without direction is just stubbornness. What made Sanders' story a story of Ikigai rather than a story of mere stubbornness was that he eventually found the convergence. He found the point where what he loved, the craft of cooking and the pleasure of feeding people well, what he was genuinely skilled at, his specific recipe, and his ability to teach others to execute it consistently, what the world needed, an affordable, accessible, reliably good meal, and what he could be paid for, all came together. The persistence was in service of finding and then living that convergence. And this is a crucial distinction, because not all persistence is Ikigai aligned. Some persistence is just the inability to let go of something that has never been right. The art of the Ikigai journey, and it is genuinely an art, requiring sensitivity and discernment that takes time to develop, is learning to tell the difference between the persistence that is building toward something real and the persistence that is simply avoidance of the more frightening work of starting over in a new direction. The elders of Okinawa knew this difference intuitively. They had not necessarily been doing the same thing their entire lives. Many had changed direction, adapted, reinvented themselves in response to the changing conditions of their world. What had remained constant was not the specific activity, but the quality of engagement with it. The full presence, the genuine care, the absence of going through the motions. Now let us go deep into something that the book raises, and that I believe is one of the most philosophically rich ideas in the entire exploration of Ikigai: the relationship between accepting mortality and living fully. The people of Okinawa have a different relationship with death than most of the modern Western world. They do not pretend it is not coming. They do not hide it behind euphemism and institutional medicine and the frantic avoidance of any reminder that life is finite. They live with death as a presence, as a companion that walks alongside them from their very first breath, and this companionship, far from being morbid or paralyzing, is one of the sources of their extraordinary vitality. There is a Japanese concept called mono no aware, which translates roughly as the pathos of things, the bittersweet awareness of the transience of all things. The cherry blossoms that fall after just a few days of bloom are not a tragedy to the Japanese. They are the most beautiful thing precisely because they are so brief. Their beauty and their brevity are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. And this understanding, this willingness to look directly at the fact that every moment is passing, that nothing lasts, that you and everyone you love will one day be gone, is not a source of despair for those who have truly absorbed it. It is a source of urgency, not the panicked, anxious urgency of someone running from something, but the clean, calm urgency of someone who knows that now is the only time they have, and that now is, therefore, the time to do what matters most. The Stoic philosophers had their own version of this insight. They called it memento mori, which means remember that you will die. And they used this reminder not as a counsel of despair, but as a clarifying lens through which to evaluate every choice. Is what I am doing right now, in this moment, worth the irreplaceable time of my one finite life? If the answer is yes, good, continue with full commitment. If the answer is no, then change course. Because the fact that you will die means that every moment spent not living your Ikigai is a moment that cannot be recovered. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal that would become the Meditations, returned to this theme again and again. You could leave life right now, he wrote to himself, and that very thought should determine what you do and say and think. Not because life is meaningless, precisely because life is not meaningless. Because it matters so much, because it is so finite and so precious, that squandering it on what does not genuinely matter is the greatest possible waste. And when you put memento mori alongside the Okinawan concept of Ikigai, something remarkable happens. The question is no longer how do I stay comfortable and avoid pain and maximize pleasure and manage my image and get through the days until the weekend comes. The question becomes the only question that has ever really mattered. What would I do with this one, finite, precious, unrepeatable life if I were living it fully, if I were giving it everything I have, if I were honoring the extraordinary improbability of my own existence by actually showing up for it? That question, held seriously, changes everything. Now I want to bring in another dimension of the book's wisdom that has not gotten enough attention in the popular discussion of Ikigai, and that is the role of simplicity. Not the minimalism that is currently fashionable, which is often more about aesthetic performance than genuine living, but the deep simplicity that comes from knowing what matters and having the courage to let go of what does not. The Okinawan lifestyle is striking in its simplicity, not poverty, not deprivation, but an absence of excess that is clearly intentional, clearly chosen, and clearly connected to the overall quality of life. The homes of Okinawan elders are typically small, uncluttered, and open to nature. The social activities are centered around connection rather than consumption. The food is simple and local. The clothing is practical. The entertainments are communal. This is not an accident. This is not the result of limited resources. It is a deeply considered way of being in the world that prioritizes direct experience over the accumulation of things, relationships over status symbols, presence over productivity. And the effect of this simplicity on the nervous system, on the quality of attention available for living, is enormous. Consider the science of decision fatigue. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister and his colleagues has shown that the ability to make good decisions is a finite resource that depletes with every choice made, however small. The more decisions you have to make in a day, the worse the quality of your later decisions becomes. And in a modern life full of infinite options, notifications, consumer choices, social media decisions about what to share and what to respond to and who to compare yourself to, the cognitive load of just existing has become staggering. The person who has simplified their life, who has reduced the number of irrelevant decisions they face each day, who has organized their environment and their routines around what genuinely matters, is not sacrificing richness. They are purchasing the most valuable thing available in the modern world, which is the quality of attention to bring to the things that actually count. Steve Jobs famously wore the same outfit every day, not because he lacked imagination, but because he understood that every decision costs cognitive currency and he wanted to spend his where it mattered most. Barack Obama has spoken about a similar practice during his time in office. Einstein reportedly owned multiple identical suits for the same reason. These are extreme examples, but the underlying logic is sound. Simplify what can be simplified so that you can be fully present for what cannot. The Okinawan elders had arrived at this wisdom not through productivity research, but through a cultural philosophy that had been refined over centuries. They understood, in their bones, that a life crammed full of stuff and stimulation and obligation and performance is not a rich life. It is an exhausted one. And an exhausted person cannot find their Ikigai. They cannot sustain it. They cannot give it the quality of attention it deserves. Simplify. Not because simplicity is fashionable, but because clarity requires space. Now let us talk about movement, because this is another area where the Okinawan way of life reveals something that the modern fitness industry gets almost entirely wrong. The elders of Okinawa do not go to gyms. They do not follow workout programs. They do not count macros or optimize their recovery protocols or periodize their training cycles. And yet, physiologically, they are among the most vital elderly people on the planet. Their muscles maintain function and mass far longer than the statistical average. Their cardiovascular systems remain remarkably healthy well into very advanced age. Their balance and coordination are impressive. Their energy is consistent. How? The answer is deceptively simple. They move. All day, every day, without separating movement from living. The Okinawan elder who tends a garden is not exercising. She is living. But in the act of living, she is squatting and standing, bending and reaching, walking and carrying, using her body in the full range of its functional capacity without ever calling it a workout. The fisherman who rows his boat before dawn is not doing cardiovascular training. He is working. But the work is the movement, and the movement is inseparable from the purpose. This is what the Blue Zone researchers call NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is a complicated way of saying all the energy you burn just by living an active life. And it turns out that NEAT, the accumulated movement of a life lived without the modern convenience of sitting still for 10 hours a day, is often more powerful in its long-term health effects than any discrete exercise program. The ancient Greeks had a similar understanding, encoded in their concept of the gymnasium, which was not primarily a place for exercise, but a place for the full development of the human being through integrated physical, intellectual, and social engagement. The Greek ideal of kalos kagathos, the beautiful and the good, understood physical vitality not as separate from character and purpose, but as an expression of them. A man who kept his body vital and capable was a man who was honoring the gift of his existence, who was taking seriously his capacity to engage fully with the world. Across from ancient Greece, in the Japan of the same period, similar ideas were taking root in the martial traditions, in the practices of Budo, the way of the warrior. The samurai trained not just to fight, but to develop a quality of presence and awareness and responsiveness that extended into every area of their lives. The discipline of the body was simultaneously the discipline of the mind, and both were in service of the development of character, of the capacity to be fully present, fully alive, fully useful, in whatever circumstances life placed before them. Move, not as punishment, not as obligation. Move because your body is an expression of who you are and what you care about. Move because vitality in the body feeds vitality in everything else. Move because the Okinawan elders who are still gardening and fishing and walking and dancing at 100 years old are not doing it out of discipline. They are doing it out of love for the life they are still living. And now, let me bring you to something that the book explores with great sensitivity, and that I think is one of its most quietly powerful insights: the relationship between creativity and longevity. Study after study, across enormously different cultural contexts and research methodologies, has found that people who engage in creative activity, whether painting or music or writing or woodcarving or cooking or storytelling or gardening or any other form of creative expression, live longer and experience significantly better mental and physical health as they age than people who do not. The mechanism is multifold. Creative engagement produces flow states, and we have already established how powerful flow is for health and happiness. Creative activity stimulates neural pathways in ways that routine tasks do not, building what neuroscientists call cognitive reserve, a kind of mental flexibility and resilience that helps the brain maintain function even as it ages. Creative expression provides an outlet for emotional experience, allowing the processing of difficult feelings in a way that reduces the physiological burden of carrying them internally. And creative work, like any purposeful activity, provides a reason to get up in the morning. Think about Beethoven, who composed some of his most extraordinary music, including the Ninth Symphony, completely deaf. Think about Titian, the great Venetian painter, who was still producing extraordinary work at nearly 100 years old. Think about Georgia O'Keeffe, whose painting became more powerful and more luminous as she aged, who was still going out into the desert of New Mexico to look at the light when she was in her 90s. Think about Pablo Casals, the great cellist, who reportedly practiced for hours every day into extreme old age, and when asked why, at 90, he still practiced so diligently, said simply, "I'm beginning to notice some improvement." The centenarians of Okinawa are creative people. Not all of them are artists in the conventional sense, but they engage with the world creatively. They cook with improvisation and joy. They tend gardens that reflect their aesthetic sensibility as much as their nutritional needs. They tell stories. They sing. They make things. They engage with life as a creative act rather than a routine to be endured. And this connects back to Ikigai in a profound way. Because your Ikigai, whatever form it takes, is a creative act. It is the act of bringing something into existence that would not exist without you. A meal, a repaired engine, a comforted child, a well-tended field, a beautiful piece of woodwork, a well-argued legal defense, a carefully composed piece of music, a business that serves its community, a piece of writing that helps someone understand themselves better. All of these are creative acts. All of them require the particular, irreplaceable quality of your attention and your care. And all of them, when pursued with that attention and that care, contribute to a longer, healthier, more genuinely satisfying life. Not as a side effect, as a direct result. Now I want to bring you to the final and perhaps most personal dimension of the Ikigai philosophy, and that is the question of how you begin. Because by this point, if you have been with me on this journey, if you have felt any of this resonating in the quieter parts of yourself, the question that is probably most alive in you right now is not what is Ikigai. The question is, how do I find mine? How do I start? The first step is also the most difficult in the modern world. It is stillness. Not meditation as a performance, not a mindfulness app, not 10 minutes of breathing between checking your phone and checking it again. Real stillness. The kind where you sit with yourself, without agenda, without the pressure to produce or achieve or arrive anywhere in particular, and simply listen. In Japan, there is a traditional practice called Morita therapy, developed in the early 20th century by a psychiatrist named Shoma Morita, which has remarkable similarities to Western mindfulness traditions, but which emerged from a completely different philosophical root. Morita therapy asks people to begin by simply being still, by stopping all the effortful management of their emotional state and their self-perception, and allowing themselves to simply experience what is there. Not to fix it, not to optimize it, just to feel it. From that place of honest stillness, from that ground of genuine self-presence, it becomes possible to hear the quieter signals of your inner life, the things that spark your interest without being told to, the questions that you cannot stop thinking about, the activities that, when you engage in them, feel like coming home, the needs of the world that you find yourself caring about even when you try not to. These are the threads. Follow them. The ancient Polynesian navigators who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments or maps did not navigate by having a detailed plan for every moment of the voyage. They navigated by reading the stars, the waves, the wind, the behavior of birds, the temperature of the water beneath their hulls. They were extraordinarily attentive to real signals in the real world, and they followed those signals with confidence and consistency, making small adjustments as new information arrived, trusting in the overall direction even when specific landmarks were not visible. That is how you find your Ikigai, not by having a perfect plan, not by figuring it all out before you begin, by paying deep, honest, consistent attention to the real signals of your own life and following them, one step at a time, with the same confidence that the Polynesian navigator extended to the ocean. The second step is to start where you are. Not where you wish you were, not where you think you should be, where you actually are, with what you actually have, in the life you are actually living right now. This sounds obvious. It is almost never actually practiced. Most people are waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting until they have more money or more freedom or fewer obligations or more energy or more confidence or more clarity. Waiting for the conditions that will make it feel safe to begin. But those conditions never quite arrive, do they? There is always one more obstacle to manage. One more piece of the puzzle that is not yet in place. The wisdom of Kaizen that we discussed earlier is precisely the antidote to this waiting. You do not need perfect conditions to take the next small step. You do not need to have everything figured out before you begin to move. You need only to take one genuine step in the direction of what matters to you, and then another, and then another. The man who wants to write but has no time can write one sentence before he goes to sleep tonight. The man who wants to learn a craft but has no money for lessons can watch one video and practice one technique this weekend. The man who wants to rebuild his health but has no access to a gym can walk around his block once more than he did yesterday. These are not inspirational platitudes. These are the actual mechanics of change. Small, real, consistent actions taken in the direction of what matters, compounded over time, are how every extraordinary life in human history has been built. The third step is to pay attention to what energizes you and what drains you. This sounds simple, but requires a kind of honest self-observation that most people find genuinely difficult. because it means acknowledging truths that might be uncomfortable. It might mean acknowledging that the career you have invested a decade in actually drains you, that the social obligations you have been honoring out of guilt rather than genuine connection are costing you more than they give, that the city you live in or the daily routine you follow or the relationship patterns you have inherited from your upbringing are not actually aligned with who you are or what you need. The Okinawan elders did not maintain things in their lives that consistently drained them, not because they were selfish, but because they understood, intuitively and culturally, that you cannot give from depletion. You cannot serve the world with the full force of your gifts if you are spending all of your energy managing things that take rather than give. The garden, the community, the fishing, the cooking, the morning tea, the evening conversation. These were not obligations to be endured. They were chosen with the understanding that they gave back at least as much as they required, and usually more. Look at your own life with this lens. What gives you energy? What drains it? And ask yourself honestly whether the balance reflects a life organized around your Ikigai, or a life organized around the expectations and demands of everyone else. The fourth step is to find your people. We talked about the moai, the social structure of lifelong community that is one of the most reliable predictors of Okinawan longevity. But you do not have to be born into a moai to create one. You can build one, deliberately, intentionally, by identifying the people in your life who genuinely energize you, who reflect back to you the best of who you are, who challenge you to grow rather than pressure you to shrink, and then investing in those relationships with the same consistency and care that the Okinawan communities invest in each other. This might mean letting go of some relationships that are not aligned with this, not with cruelty or drama, but with the quiet clarity of a person who has made a decision about what kind of life they intend to live and who they intend to share it with. And alongside this, seek out people who are ahead of you on the path you are trying to walk. Find the masters of your craft, however loosely you define craft. Learn from them, not just their techniques, but their way of being, their relationship with their work, their understanding of what makes the whole endeavor worth the effort. The apprenticeship model that dominated human learning for most of recorded history, the relationship between master and student that transmitted not just skills but wisdom, not just techniques but a whole way of seeing, is more valuable than any course or certification or credential. Find your masters. Sit at their feet, metaphorically or literally. Ask them questions. Pay deep attention to their answers. The fifth and final step, at least for today, is to make peace with uncertainty. Because one of the great fears that prevents people from committing to their Ikigai is the fear that they might get it wrong. That they might invest years in a direction that turns out not to be quite right. That they might build something and then discover they need to build something different. And this fear, reasonable as it might seem, contains within it a fundamental misunderstanding of how a life of purpose actually works. Your Ikigai is not a fixed destination. It is a living thing. It grows and changes as you grow and change. The fisherman who finds his Ikigai in the sea at 20 may find, at 60, that his deeper Ikigai is in teaching young fishermen what he has learned. The artist who finds her Ikigai in painting may discover, when her eyes begin to fail, that the deeper thread is not in the specific act of painting, but in the quality of attention she brings to making beautiful things, and that this quality can be expressed through sculpture or textile or garden design just as fully. Your Ikigai is not a job title. It is not a life plan. It is a quality of engagement with the world, a depth of presence and purpose and contribution that can find expression through many different forms over the course of a long life. And the uncertainty that this involves, the fact that you cannot know in advance exactly where the path will lead, is not a flaw in the design. It is the design itself. It is what keeps the journey alive and interesting and genuinely yours. The explorer Roald Amundsen, the Norwegian who led the first expedition to reach the South Pole, is one of history's great examples of someone who embraced uncertainty as the very substance of his purpose. He did not pursue exploration in spite of its uncertainty. He pursued it because of its uncertainty, because the unknown was precisely where the real work of discovery happened. And he prepared for that uncertainty not by trying to eliminate it, but by developing the skills, the strength, the judgment, and the team that would allow him to navigate it effectively when it arrived. Your uncertainty is not evidence that you have not found your path. It is evidence that you are on a real one. Safe paths are predictable. Meaningful paths are alive with surprise. And now let me bring everything we have covered today back together, because I want to give you something you can carry with you from this moment forward. Something more than information. Something that might actually change the way you wake up tomorrow morning. The philosophy of Ikigai, as it has been lived by the centenarians of Okinawa, and as it has been documented and illuminated by Francesc Miralles and Hector Garcia, is not complicated, but it is demanding. It demands honesty. It demands attention. It demands the courage to stop pretending that the life you are living is the only possible life, or that the person you have become is the only possible version of yourself. It asks you the four great questions. What do you love? What are you good at? What does the world need? What can you be paid for? And it asks you to be patient and persistent and genuinely curious in the pursuit of the place where all four answers point to the same thing. It tells you to build a moai, a circle of people who know you and love you and will walk with you through every season of your life. It tells you to move and eat simply and let go of what you do not need. It tells you to find flow in your daily work, to resist the seduction of constant stimulation and distraction, to create space for the quality of attention that genuine living requires. It tells you that your purpose is not something you arrive at once and then possess forever. It is something you practice every day, in the same way the shokunin practices his craft, with full presence and continuous improvement, and the humility to know that there is always more to learn and always a better way to serve. It tells you that you will face difficulty and disappointment and loss and failure, and that these things are not evidence that you are on the wrong path, but that you are on a real one. That the obstacles are not in the way, they are the way. And it tells you, with the quiet authority of centuries of lived experience, that a life organized around genuine purpose, around the daily practice of doing what you love in service of what the world needs, using the gifts you have been given in partnership with people you genuinely care about, is not just a more meaningful life. It is a longer one. It is a healthier one. It is a more beautiful one. The proof is in the gardens of Okinawa, where people in their 90s still move through the morning light with the unhurried certainty of beings who know exactly why they are here. The proof is in the workshops of the shokunin, where a single craft has become a life, and a life has become a kind of prayer. The proof is in the social circles of the moai, where the warmth of lifelong connection has built a wall against the cold of meaninglessness that no amount of entertainment or consumption or status could ever construct. The proof is in every human life across every culture and every century where a person found what they were made for and gave themselves to it fully and lived, as a result, more completely than they had ever imagined possible. Your Ikigai is not somewhere else. It is not in a different life or a different body or a different past. It is here, in the one life you have, in the specific combination of gifts and experiences and passions and capacities that make you who you are. It is closer than you think. It is, in fact, as close as the question you are most afraid to answer honestly. What would you do if you knew it mattered? What would you be if you gave yourself full permission to be it? What is the thing that, when you imagine doing it without apology and without limit, makes something inside you go very, very quiet and very, very still, in the way that only true things do? That stillness is the signal. Follow it. The people of Okinawa followed it, and 100 years later, they were still gardening, still fishing, still laughing with their friends in the golden afternoon light, still in every way that truly counts, magnificently, irreplaceably alive. Now let me take you one step further into the heart of this philosophy, because there is something Miralles and Garcia write about that most people skip over too quickly, and it might be the single most transformative idea in the entire book. It is the concept that your Ikigai does not just sustain your life. It shapes the quality of every moment within it. Not just the big moments, the ordinary ones. Think about the difference between two men washing dishes. One man washes dishes as a chore to be completed, an obligation he resents, a task that stands between him and something he actually wants to do. His mind is elsewhere. His movements are mechanical. The time passes slowly and feels wasted. The other man, trained in the Zen tradition of mindful living, washes dishes as a complete act in itself. He pays attention to the temperature of the water, the texture of the bowl, the particular resistance of different surfaces to the sponge. He is fully present. The task is not separating him from his life. It is his life, in this moment. And those two experiences of washing the same pile of dishes in the same kitchen are separated by an entire universe of felt quality. This is what the Japanese concept of Zen and the Okinawan philosophy of Ikigai have in common with each other and with nearly every wisdom tradition that has survived the test of centuries. The quality of your attention determines the quality of your life, not just in the grand moments, but in the small ones, in the daily, ordinary, unremarkable moments that make up the overwhelming majority of any human existence. And this is not just philosophy. This is practical. Because if your happiness and your sense of meaning depend on the arrival of exceptional circumstances, then you will spend most of your life waiting. But if your happiness and your sense of meaning are available in the quality of attention you bring to whatever is in front of you right now, then you are always already inside the life you want to be living. You are always already home. The ancient Stoic emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself that the life we live most is the one we live in the present moment. Because the past is memory and the future is imagination. And only this moment, this specific, irreplaceable now, is real enough to actually inhabit. The Buddhist traditions of Southeast Asia, Theravada Buddhism in particular, with its extraordinary emphasis on the development of mindfulness, sati in Pali, teach that the liberation from suffering is not achieved by changing your circumstances, but by changing your relationship to your circumstances. By bringing a quality of clear, honest, compassionate attention to whatever is actually happening right now. And Ikigai, rooted in a Japanese culture that has been shaped by Zen Buddhism and by centuries of practiced attention, says the same thing through the lens of purpose. Your Ikigai is not only in the grand work you do, it is in the quality of presence you bring to the work. It is in the care with which you do even the ordinary things. It is in the attention and the love that you pour into whatever is in front of you, because you understand that each moment is the only moment you have, and therefore it deserves everything. This is the secret that the Okinawan elders are holding. Not a technique, not a diet, not a program, a quality of being, a way of inhabiting their own lives so fully and so honestly that nothing is wasted. Not a single conversation, not a single meal, not a single morning with the garden in the early light. Nothing is wasted because everything is their Ikigai. Everything is their reason for being. Everything is the point. And this, ultimately, is the invitation that Miralles and Garcia are extending to every person who opens their book. Not to find the one perfect purpose and organize your entire life around it as efficiently as possible, but to develop a quality of presence and attention and care that transforms whatever your life already contains into something genuinely worth living. You do not have to travel to Okinawa to find this. You do not have to wait for the perfect conditions or the perfect clarity or the perfect opportunity. You have to begin here, now, with what you have, in the life you are living, asking the questions honestly, following the sparks of genuine interest wherever they lead, building the community that will sustain you, moving and eating and resting in ways that honor the body you have been given, and trusting, with the same calm confidence that the Polynesian navigator extended to the open ocean, that if you pay attention and keep moving, you will find your way. The old fisherman of Ojimi does not know how many mornings he has left. He does not know what the sea will bring or whether his nets will return full or empty. He does not know what the light will look like today, or whether his knees will ache, or whether his old friends will be waiting for him when he comes home. He does not know, and he does not need to know. He knows only that the morning is coming, that the sea is there, that the work is his, and that being alive is enough reason to get up and face it with everything he has. That is Ikigai, that is the secret, and it has always been yours.